my name's Morgan Ritter. I recently started at the Arts Council of Lake Oswego. I'm an artist and poet, and the new curator and program manager. Uh, Thanks to Nicole for organizing this, and thanks so much for the artists to be being here and sharing so much. Yeah, so please come by the gallery if you haven't seen the current show. And I'll just give a really brief overview of the art community and conversation. This is a free lecture series hosted by the Arts Council, made possible by the generous support of Josie Mendoza and Hugh Mackworth. So this evening, we'll be hearing from Terresa White and Mike Suri. The conversation will go over their unique artistic practices and then kind of their collaborative work together, and then hearing about the various processes that go into creating public art and fabrication and installation, and also the use of technology in all these processes, which is really interesting. We have some special guests that can talk more about that. Teresa White's art practice draws inspiration from her Yupik, Alaska Native, French, and mixed European ancestry. Central to this inspiration is Yupik stories of transformation and the Yupik understanding of the interrelationship and spirit of all beings, including human and animal people, water and sky people, river, sea, rock, and beings we cannot see. Her artwork, created using ceramics and bronze, explores traditional themes and their interplay, confluence, and divergence with urban life in the Pacific Northwest. White's bronze work, Dependent Arising, Owl, and Lemming, became part of Lake Oswego's permanent outdoor collection in the Gallery Without Walls program in 2021. And Mike Suri is an artist, educator, and custom fabricator. He's participated in numerous regional projects, public art projects. Suri also has sculptures in the Lake Oswego's permanent outdoor collection, including Sprout in 2010 and Clackamas in 2016. He approaches the art of metalcraft experimentally, using a variety of techniques and equipment, both traditional and non-traditional. He also dedicates a considerable amount of time to teaching the skills of practical fabrication, direct metal sculpture, and blacksmithing, while also mentoring apprentices in his studio.
All right. So I'm up first here. 2 slides to give you sort of a brief conversation about who I am and what I do. I love all those pieces you see up there. I think one of the interesting parts about what I've got going on these days, my scope of what I do throughout the year covers a few different things now. I'm actively pursuing studio projects, everything from creative things to mundane things. It just depends on who calls me and what comes through the door. Though virtually all of them are focused on creativity right now. In addition to my studio work, I install, deinstall, repair, and restore artworks of all different kinds for the city of Lake Oswego, city of Happy Valley, and other entities and organizations. I utilize my skill set as someone who can maneuver sculptures and these objects around and understands the material going on there to do that. For the last almost 10 years, have been teaching part-time at Mount Hood Community College in the Applied Technologies Department in the welding program. So I'm not teaching art to students, I'm teaching vocation. And I'll tell you, I've learned more about my craft in that 9.5 years than I did in the first 20 of doing it myself in my studio. In addition to that, I'm actively nurturing and maintaining assistant relationships. These are not mentor-apprentice relationships. These are really talented people who have spent time in my studio working with me, and as some of them will tell you, there's maybe a few of them around here tonight. Like, it's kind of a lifelong contract. Come in and you work in my studio for 6 months to a year, and then you might go off and do some other things, but you're still on my phone list. And I have really been so fortunate to have quite a few really fantastic assistants. And then I have a handful of mentees, of people who are in that apprentice position, who are interested in maintaining a dialogue with me about this craft, whether it's art or craft, right? They're one and the same and separate. Uh, and so, what I think is interesting about all those facets is that more than any other project I've worked on in my career so far, they all connected on this one, right? Those relationships, my experience at Mount Hood, the education I've gotten from being at Mount Hood, the relationships that I've developed working with the municipalities and the various art programs, the experiences I've gotten from handling all that artwork. There's not a sculpture in the outdoor exhibit that I haven't put my hands on in some way or another, whether I've moved it, put it there in the first place, maybe fixed it, oiled it, waxed it. You know, I've had a chance to look at them closely and consider what I like and what I don't like about them, and have that affect my work. So, you know, all of these projects on here involve different processes to get them made, and I can go into that at another time. But that was my first point. We can look at the next slide now. Here's some more, cool pieces. Brushing the windblown tree here is up at Maryhill Museum in Goldendale, Washington. Clackamas in the top right at George Rogers Park here in town. The Interstate Firehouse Cultural Center has the marquee there, and that the perch, the white tree, is in Hood River. And so, along with all those components, the maintain, figuring out work, making work in the studio, doing what needs to be done to show up and be a teacher, maintaining the relationships with the people that help me, the industry partners that help me. The work that I'm creating now and that Teresa and I created, we can't do just individually. Not capable of doing all of that ourselves. So, those relationships need to be nurtured. It's not just a phone call and a click. These are conversations that have to happen. Conceptually in my work, I don't spend a lot of time on stories. It's really a visceral experience for me. I like making sculpture. I like working with materials. And I want the viewer of my work to have that same experience. I want you to feel my hand in the work and see it in the work. So I choose materials that give me a sensation. I've really enjoyed working with steel and thick steel and soft edges and shaping it in ways that aren't so common in the structural shapes we're all used to seeing. So, that's kind of how these forms come around. And, I'm always trying to sort of freeze that energy that comes when you're in the midst of making something and you're in that childlike, excited state. These are industrial materials, so they take a great deal of effort and real physical, chemical, scientific, things to happen in place in order to make work out of them. And when you can get those components in place, the equipment and the help and the technology and the understanding, and you get those moments where you're holding a piece of material and you're shaping it, and interesting things are emerging. That's what I'm after, and I hope that is frozen in the works. But later on, when you come see it, you can have a similar experience.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. I recognize some of your faces from some other events that I've attended here in Lake Oswego through the Arts Council. And thanks to our hosts, really appreciate all that you have done for us. And just the relationships, being able to call on you when I have a question. I want to echo Mike's comment about really relying on our partners. Arts Council of Lake Oswego have been a great partner to me. You individually have been great partners too. But yeah, I am someone who's constantly calling the experts in what they do to help me figure out where I should go next or what I need to do. But yeah, so thank you. Also, just want to also say I want to honor and acknowledge my my culture bearers up there in the top right. My granny is on the far right, and then my aunties. Some of my aunties, they grew up in McGrath, Alaska, in the village on the Kuskokwim River, north of where my great granny's from, in Bethel, Alaska. Bethel, a little further south on the Kuskokwim. The village they grew up in actually is an Athabascan. Not that you all care, but it's an Athabascan village, and we're Yupik. So it's kind of interesting to me different peoples up there. But my great granny, went up with my great grandpa. Anyway, so I kind of just wanted, I put on this slide some of my bronze works and just want to tell you a little bit about my inspiration. My very earliest inspirations, I think, were Yupik masks, and they're carved wooden masks that are used for dancing. Oh, I also want to shout out, and it's related to my inspiration, shout out to my cousin Troy. I always mention Troy when I talk about my work because he's a fellow artist. He's an incredible sculptor. He's just a great artist all the way around, and he is my go-to. Speaking of like needing input, he is my person to call. He's my constant advisor. So anyway, I say that to say, where was I going with that? Anyway, just thank you, Troy. He's not here, but he is the COO and Vice President of Form Foundry here in Portland, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about the process, and a couple other people from Form here to also talk about that process. But the reason why I mentioned Troy is because I started sculpting when I was, let's see, it was about 15 years ago. I was 40-ish, and I was going to the beach for the weekend, and I really wanted something to do with my hands. I was going a place with no TV, there was just basically going to just be me and Amy, my wife, and the beach. And so I was like, Troy, can I get some clay? And he like brought me some clay, and I went and I just started playing with it, not knowing anything about clay. Never touched clay before, but I just started sculpting faces. And so all my work you'll see as there will be a face somewhere in something I'm sculpting. And so some of these pieces, like the one that the walrus, was my first bronze piece. I didn't show much of that piece, but that was inspired by seeing the Northwest Inupiaq dancers in rural Oregon on a weird whim. My granny and my mom and cousins and aunties went out like in this field in rural Oregon and saw these dancers from Alaska, and I ended up dancing with them later. But that piece really is my first like love as far as form in 3D. Because when I started, I was just doing like masks, not in the round, not pieces in the round. Some other pieces. This one was, sorry, I'm reaching over you. This is a piece that I did. I collaborated with two other Alaska Native artists, and I still want to call out here. This one, some of you are familiar with. That's the rising owl and lemming that's in this beautiful city on A Street. Yeah, I think all of these are limited edition, except this. There were 3 made, and they're gone. The one up in the corner is my only piece. That little amulet. It's a little friendship amulet that they kind of appeared to me in a dream, and those are my only open edition piece. Ready. Okay. I also do ceramic work. I show right now. I show at various galleries for random exhibits, but I also have work always at the Stonington Gallery in Seattle, and let's see, I show. There's a piece in the slide before that is right now on loan to the Grand Ronde tribe at their museum. I show around like many different places, but I also do commissions. The one on the far right, that fish, that's one of my favorite pieces. And I just took a snapshot of it. I didn't get a good like professional picture or anything, but that was for someone who like showed me a picture of 2 young people in love who were camping, and like they just caught a fish and they were just getting ready to fry it up. But anyway, I love that piece. I don't know why, it just makes me really happy to look at it. So I include it in part just because it shows I do commissions pretty frequently. And let's see, what else do I want to call out? To the left of the fish on the top, the face that is in that kestrel piece is a Ewa, which is Yupik. It's the idea of the person of the thing. So the kestrel's person, not that it's a separate person, but it's the person, and like some people might call it spirit of the animal. But I do a lot of Ewas, so you might see faces embedded sort of like in this heart area of things that I do. And then the bottom, the owl, the hands that are in the owl, those are eyes of awareness, and those are they have a lot of meanings, but those holes in the hands, you'll see a lot of my work too. And it has meaning around like spiritual vision or insight or seeing clearly or yeah, just those are the main ideas, and then there's many others. But the also circle and dot motif that you'll see in Yupik things, you'll find in my work as well. We're here to talk about this piece that we did and that just got installed in December. This public art piece. Mike and I met through the Gallery Without Walls. We met in part because I was getting ready to get my piece enlarged, and I needed a base. I was trying to figure out, I hadn't done this before. I'm new to public art, and I contacted Nicole and was like, "Oh, do you know anyone who can do a base for me?" She put me in touch with Mike, who didn't end up making my base, but I loved him, and I started getting really excited when I looked at Mike's artwork and like really following up Mike's art. So when I saw the Regional Arts and Culture Council did an RFP or a call to artists for this piece at the park, I read through it and I was like, "Oh, I can't. This is too big for me. I'm new to public art. It's too like grand, the scale that I would like to do for something that I could do on my own. Who would I want to work with?" Mike came up first in my mind, so just reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to work together?"
Yeah, I'm so glad that you did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long ago was that? That was, the RFP was what, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
If not, okay.
Yeah, right around 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was exciting. I remember when Teresa called me and asked, and I said to Teresa, I love making art and figuring it out. I said, but I have zero interest in applying for anything. Right? It's like there's a process to applying, just like putting together a great PowerPoint, and I'm not good at that process. And so I don't really apply for things. And Teresa's like, "No problem." I was like, "Well, great. Let's you know." Let's do something. So Teresa and I met up, and we went to an antique store. I remember, because we hadn't really ever hung out before.
No.
We just we didn't really know each other, just knew of each other, right? Both People's Choice winners. I really liked the quality of Teresa's work. I was familiar with that, and we wandered around this antique store and just sort of looked at things and talked about our various processes. And I don't know if process is what the next slide that comes up is, but yes, it is.
We also went out to the park.
Right. So
We looked around the park before the.
Was that before the antique
Yeah.
store?
I think it was. I think we met up.
So
Anyway,
Well,
we
I'll
went
tell
to
you
see-
about it, yeah.
Go ahead.
we this is where like friends and connections really come into play, right? Like I have a good friend who works for the city of Portland in the parks department, and so I was mentioning to him about it. He's like, "Oh, that's my turf. Like that's the kind of area where I am involved in park stuff." He's like, "If you ever want to talk with the ecologist, I could set that up." I'm like, "Yes, I want to meet. I want to talk." So my friend Jeremy set up a meeting with Cameron, who's the head ecologist for the city of Portland and the watershed and parks, and we got this wonderful tour of the Arrow Heights wetland area and park pre-development. And that was really where the beginning of this was that seed was planted. It's where on that tour and you know how when you're listening to someone who really knows what they're talking about, it's exciting. And this guy Cameron really knows his stuff and really liked talking about it and all the different trees and the different animals and flora and life that's in there. And things that stuck for me, and I'll let you talk about what stuck for you, but it immediately was this sort of idea of these basins draining into one another. There's sort of this the wetland ecology of that place is that water comes out of the earth somewhere towards the top, and then it fills up these basins and drains towards the bottom. And then there's all this life that happens around there, the beavers. And the beavers are a pest, but as Cameron says, you got to work with the beavers because they're not going anywhere. You can't get rid of them.
And they also bring in other species that have like exited, and
The beavers
the beavers do.
have-
When the beavers come back, things get better. The ecology improves. So even though they destroy a ton of things, they
Sure.
also improve a lot of things. So yeah.
So I was taken by that water and by the trees and just the scenery of the place. But additionally, while we were there, we saw other great things.
Yep, we did. We actually saw, and I was excited about the wildlife. And so
Yes.
we'll get to that. We'll get to that later.
You want to get to that one later? Okay, so that conversation led us to I think part of what's interesting about this collaboration is like how did we do it? How did two people who have very different practices and work in very different mediums and have different ways of working. How do we bring it together in a way that feels genuine and feels really good, not just like we stuck them together? And in our conversations, I think we kind of figured out early on that my work is the less precise of the two. So in terms of like physical adaptation, how are we going to actually put two objects together? Hers is going to need to conform to mine in some way, right? Because I simply just can't, create that kind of precision. And so that's what sort of led to this modeling stage. And what you see up there, and I want you to kind of hold in your mind too, like while design is happening, while that really fun, juicy art process is happening, there's a whole other part of the brain that is like, how are you actually going to do it? How are you going to do this? How are you going to order the material? How are you going to unload the material? How are you going to pick it up, move it around? How's it all going to work? So the second to the left drawing you see there with those three pieces, that is the initial rough sketch, and that's the sculpture that you see right here. This is like a pen sketch. This is what I did after Teresa and I sort of talked about some methodology. What I went and just, aside from scale, materials, how to, I'm like, I just want to make something that I like looking at, that sort of gathers some of these things I'm feeling about here. And that's what I came up with. So I cut this out of some scrap metal. I'm not worried about size and scale, but I'm just getting shapes that I like. I'm blocking things out. And then I presented this to Teresa to say, does this do anything for you? Or should I go back to the drawing board? Would you be interested in this? And left it with her for a little while to think about and think about how she's going to apply what is genuinely hers to this. And so as she starts developing these mask ideas, and we figure, okay, this is a good direction to go. Then I take that photograph that's right there and I email it to myself. And I open it up in a drawing program that is designed for drawing files that are going to be cut by a machine. The term is CNC, computer numerical control, right? The machines all move in, ones and zeros and straight lines, very tiny straight lines for curves, but nonetheless, that it's not a smooth line like that. And so in that program, and you see the drawing in purple there to the right, and this is a drawing program that I became good at using because I teach this class at Mount Hood. Prior to teaching this class at Mount Hood, I had utilized this type of technology. I know how to draw things and provide them to my steel supplier so that they can cut the files and create patterns for me. But ever since I've been teaching this class at Mount Hood, I actually have that program, right? That program costs money. It's something that I am lucky to have because of my position there. So in the program, now I'm able to draw and relate it to real things like inches and feet and square inches and square feet and material weights and length of sheets, right? All these things have to come into play. Like how big a sheet can I cut this out of, right? If you look at this initial one here, and then you start looking at the other models, there's also a half scale model outside, right? This is just one long straight piece right here. And to scale that up, that'd be a 20-foot sheet of material, which my steel supplier can't handle and cut for me. So as I'm looking at this would be about 4 feet or so at full scale. Bigger than it could be. So now I've got to do that back and forth of what do I want to see visually? What do I want to feel visually? Cantilever and weight and shape. And what can I do? What can I have based on the reality of the situation? What can I make it out of? Can I make this out of 1-inch plate? Am I capable of that? I'd formed some 1-inch plate on a smaller scale prior to this, but never on this scale, this complexity. If you look at let's stay on that one. If you look at the left drawing there, I want you to see something. You see this piece right here, and how this now folds down, right? So this is my trickery to be able to get all my material to be cut out of 2 10 by 8 foot sheets, 1-inch plate, right? Because there's my budget. There's my material budget right there. That's a lot of pounds there. So I'm stretching and scaling my pieces in the computer program to get them to fit within the reality that I'm stuck with, which is the plates that I can acquire and that my supplier can cut. And so that little fold there, that arm coming down, that, as you see on this one, ends up swinging up in the air, creating kind of a neat little detail, was as much about creating a neat detail as it was about getting the whole part onto the plate so that I could have the size that I want without having to weld something together. It's important to me on this one, I didn't want to weld a bunch of parts together. I wanted less pieces than the previous work that I've done. So the rough sketch take a photograph of it before I shaped it, just in case we liked it. We did. That gets sent into the computer. The fixed shapes get traced, they get modified, they get refined, and then a quarter scale model gets cut. And people be like, Mike, why are you making so many models? Because I can't mess this one up. I mean, I can mess that one up, but I can't mess the 1 inch plate, 4,000 pound one up. So we make a quarter scale model. And then I provide that model to me, you know, working on there with the torch and doing some work in my studio there. Notice the color of my studio in this photograph. And then notice that in the next, you see the span of time that this whole project took. And then I brought that model to Teresa to do her work with and left it with her. And that's when, you know, she started to develop. And now let's see what the next picture is on here. So this is really the work on the large scale one. So you can see on the left here, you know, we're unloading the pieces in my front yard. You know, that's East Side Steel. Those are my guys there at East Side Steel. I've been working with EA for East Side Steel for almost 20 years. Chris, the driver, helps me unload. Didn't help anyone else unload, but Chris will help me unload. Additionally, who you don't see there is my neighbor Byron, who came over and helped me unload. So, I mean, and my crane stopped working a few moments after the picture. So there's all sorts of fun going on just to get the pieces into the backyard. And then you can see me working on the pieces here, you know, utilizing equipment that I built to do the kind of work I'm doing. It's a large hydraulic press on the right. It's a large heating torch on the left. I brought it in here. This is the torch that we use to create the heat to bend these things. It's like a little mini jet engine. It's scary. Nobody likes hearing it pop. But that's you know, some of the efforts that go into bringing these models and these pieces of material to full scale.
Yeah, actually, I think I might pass this one around. So I just want to say a couple things about like when we got to the park, we walked around with the ecologist. I was really excited about the wildlife. We were trying to, and we looked and made, you know, agreements with the Regional Arts and Culture Council to do certain things. And one of the things we wanted to do was look at what the stakeholders were interested in, the neighborhood people who use the park, plus the city and the architecture, all of the architectural firm that we work with. All of these people had input and, you know, opinions, and they're the stakeholders who we were trying to please. And we were also wanting to respond to what we experienced in the park. We saw on the day that we were there with the ecologist, we saw an owl. We saw a lot more animals as well, but we also saw peacocks, because this park is so, I don't know if you all have been over there, but there are peacocks in the neighborhood. Yes. They're everywhere. Yeah. They're on people's houses. They're in the yards. They're in the middle of the street. And yeah, it's a really unusual thing. It has a very rural vibe up there, which is changing a little bit now that they've made some road improvements for the park. But peacocks, and yeah, it's fun. And then I saw a blue heron. Did you see the blue heron?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
We saw them all. Yep.
Yeah. So there were a lot of other ones, but these were the ones that stuck in my mind that I really wanted to connect. So we were excited about the ideas of the stakeholders to make this piece a welcome to nature park because they really want people to experience nature in this park. And it's a really interesting park because it's right in the middle of like what feels very industrial but also rural. It's a really weird and interesting vibe. But we're jumped on. That was really easy. Like Mike liked the ideas. The front. So I did. You know, this is sort of something I do with these combinations of humans and animals. Back a long time ago, the story is, and the idea is a Yupik idea that the Earth's crust was thinner, and when the Earth's crust was thinner, we could communicate. Humans and non-human beings could communicate way more easily. We could even trade places. We could combine. We could there was just a lot more understanding. And so that happens a lot in my work. That idea drives a lot of my work. So that's what's happening on the front of these. I also used, the flora, some of the trees around that I wanted to incorporate. So the hair is a leaf from a different, 3 different trees here. I wasn't sure what I was going to do on the back of these. You want to say something about them? Oh, you're going to hold it.
Well, so Teresa came up with these masks based off our model there, and I think when you first showed them to me, I was like, these are beautiful. What's happening on the back?
Yeah.
And I think all I said was, I think
Go crazy.
there's an opportunity for you to really like try some new stuff and explore. There's just such an opportunity on the back here. It's like and she absolutely went for it. And I love the back of these. They're sort of abstract. They're very mycelial to me. They feel like mushrooms and very organic in that way. And I think they play really. They feel like earlobes and stuff, right? Like I feel like they really play nicely off the shapes of my sculpture. So yeah, I love the backs of them.
Yeah,
I think the backs are as cool as the fronts.
I like the backs too, and that really was this is my first you did say go crazy actually is what you said. And but
Sounds like something I'd say.
yeah, it made me feel free to,
Good.
these are going to be, they're going to be seen in the round, even though they're masked, which is the first time I'd done something like that. And what I tried to do was, I played and looked, I had these in my space for a long time. So, hopefully you can see that some of these shapes they're echoes of Mike's shapes. And they're echoes of the animals in the front. For example, this one, I'll pass this around, but can you turn that one around?
Oh, yeah.
You can kind of see, what
This one is even more so. The owl on the front here, and then you turn it around and you see like the essence of the owl back there.
yeah.
And
And some of the lines also look like his vertical lines here. Yeah.
and it's so cool the sight lines on site that you get, like you catch these glimpses through the eyes. And it's really there's a lot of really interesting sort of energy zones that form around the sculpture, and places that you can exist on it. Not that you're supposed to climb on it, you're not. But if you're on it, you can look through some of these masks and see some really interesting things. This is one of my favorites. I think it's really the shapes that are really really neat.
Thank you. I like this. Yeah, this is, obviously making a comment on this. And I'll pass this around and you can kind of look at what's happening on the back and see if you can see other parts of Mike's sculpture in the back.
Working one.
Yeah, this is a good one. So while you're looking at that, you're looking actually at one of these, the bottom left. And what I want to talk about here, first want to show my cousin Troy. He's up on a ladder at Mike's house in the backyard there. That's like almost 15 feet. He's up really high and he's using a scanning. What is the scanner called? A scanner.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to introduction? Sure. Yeah.
Is that a natural phosphorus?
Oh, I was gonna do that. Yes, please do.
So our special guests, Steve and Barbara Kingsley Crispin. And they are from Form 3D, which are colleagues of Troy, is that right? So so Form 3D are a local sculptural fabrication studio who lead the field by using new technology and traditional studio methods. And they work with artists and others to produce large sculpture. So if you want to just share a little bit about this process of technology, we probably have about a minute.
Okay. All right. I'll stand up here so you can all hear me. But Troy wasn't able to be here tonight, so I'm here in his place to kind of fill in little bits of some gaps about some of the processes that we were able to help with. And so what you see Troy doing here is Teresa sculpted her masks at a scale with the smaller scale pieces, and then she brought us in to help with the enlargement process. And so and because of, like Mike was saying, that his process, he kind of ends up what he ends up with. Like he has this idea that he's creating, but then the actual shapes are very unique. So
Right, they're similar, but this curve doesn't match that curve, doesn't match that curve, doesn't match that curve.
Yeah.
So you can't just scale this one that fit that one. It's not going to just fit the other one. So it was important, and this was really part of our conversation, that we come up with a method to merge these two things together in a way that really looked good, right?
Yeah.
That just didn't look like put on a pole or bolted onto a face. And so that's where you guys came in.
Yeah. And so we were able to scan Teresa's original clay models, and actually these are here. The one you're handling is a 3D print that came off of a large format 3D
Inside of it.
printer.
It's just
And
It's
so
just
we were
full
able to
finished.
scan these masks, and then what you see Troy doing here is scanning the finished piece of steel. And so then we're able to have these digital files in the computer that we can combine and make sure that the mask is going to fit that piece of steel. In fact, use the scan of the piece of steel to digitally cut a shape out of the mask file so that we could make patterns for it to be cast in bronze. Is that pretty much so? So and then beyond that, then we scaled up the pieces in our software to be able to print patterns to go through an investment casting process.
What you see in the red there.
Real quickly, what the direct investment is?
Yeah, so typically, traditionally, for a bronze process, you would have a piece like this, you'd make a silicone mold of it and pour a wax pattern. And lost wax casting is where you take a piece of wax and you encase it in a ceramic shell, and then you burn that wax out and replace it with metal. You break that shell off and you have a casting of your original. Well, we are going at a scale that we couldn't just make a mold of it, so we take that digital pattern and we print that wax pattern that's going into the investment for bronze casting. So what you see here are those 3D printed wax patterns that went into an investment material and were cast in bronze for the finished projects. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Appreciate it.
What that process allowed us is where in the areas where these masks land on, just like how a carpenter has to fit pieces of trim around a door, right? They've got to notch out little pieces. The fit was perfect enough that it allowed us to do a not quite a welded connection, because technically welding is all the same material. But what we call a brazed connection, which was a big topic of conversation. And you see some samples here. These are bronze castings that have been braze welded to these blocks of steel. These were my tests for that initial part. And part of that conversation, is that you've got two dissimilar metals here, and so those of you that are have some chemistry background, like there's some potential issues that come up there, and an anode and cathode and dielectric reactions and galvanic corrosion is what we're actually afraid of. And so it was really good. Steve asked me that question. He's like, I just think you might want to think about that a little bit. And it was good because I did. And I teach this class too, so and I never really gone that far into that. I teach mostly ferrous metallurgy, so I'm talking about heat treating of steels, not so much this kind of thing. But it forced me to dig deeper into that and into the noble scale, which is a numerical scale that talks about how free the electrons are in various pieces of metal. And what I was able to land on is that in this particular application, we're going to be good to go, right? It's going to hold up, and the reason why it's going to hold up is because in the weld we're missing one of the three components in order to have galvanic corrosion, which is you have to have two dissimilar metals, they have to be touching, and you have to have an electrolyte. And if you think about a threaded bolt into a nut type situation, you wouldn't take one metal necessarily and thread it into another dissimilar metal there, because you have that galvanic reaction happen between those threads. Even though it might be tight, there's still air in there, there's still moisture in there. So they're going to have corrosion, you may have issues. But there is no, the metal is solid. There may be air inside here in other places where it's touching it, but the actual structural connection point of these pieces of bronze to the mask doesn't have that, because it's a solid metallic mass. So myself, and I gave it as an assignment to my class. I said, I want you guys to look this up and tell me if I'm making a mistake. And it's way over their heads. But a few of them didn't come back, and they were like, the best we can come up with is to make some staining, right? Which you could see might not be desirable in different applications, right? If you have fresh bronze and steel, you don't always want steel rusting on your bronze or bronze dripping on your steel. But in this particular application, that's not an issue for us. And additionally to that weld that goes all the way around it, which wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have such a great fit. That was why it was so important that we had a great fit.
And that's because of the scanning that Troy did.
That's what
And
that
the
allowed us to
computer
do.
work that he did that you can sort of see up on that.
Precisely.
I just pointed
There's also a steel peg in there.
the
So
red.
there's 2 points of reinforcement, and the computer work that they were able to do allowed the bronze mask to come and just fit perfectly, slide over that steel peg and hug the steel surface here, allowing us to do that really clean and beautiful braze weld, which, we've got silicon bronze, we've got mild steel, and then we used aluminum bronze to do the welding, so a little bit more ductility. But it's interesting, like all that goes into this becoming successful. You know, there's so much more than just wanting to make a piece of artwork, and you know, things I never imagined I would know as well as I know now, but it's exciting to know them.
And then.
So we got some pictures of installation here, right? That's, you know, you still have, not only have to build it, you got to figure out how to get there. And this is where we rely on friends and industry partners. You know, that telehandler or job site forklift you see there, what an amazing piece of equipment, was coordinated and run by my good friend Ronnie Boycourt. Ronnie was one of my first assistants 2 decades ago, worked with me full time for quite a while, and then has gone off and does all sorts of, you know, he's one of the main people at Pickathon now. He does all sorts of interesting stuff. But still, when I call and I say, Ronnie, I need you, you know, Ronnie will come help me out. Ronnie's certified to run that piece of equipment. So Ronnie surgically removed it from my backyard, right? I've only got an 8-foot driveway. So he drove, like, I mean, you know, he drove that thing into my backyard, lifted the sculpture out. Look, you see him loading it on my trailer right here. And you know, that's what kind of day it was.
Teresa's like,
And,
It was this far from the neighbor's window. It was super scary.
yeah, it was very close. And I have great neighbors. I couldn't do this without my neighbors. My neighbors helped me build the shop I work in now. And then we had that piece of equipment delivered to the job site, and we plucked it out of the trailer, and we brought it to the job site and set it on the concrete pad, which a week earlier I had drilled and set anchors in front of an inspector. You know, that's another part of this too. The welds, the pad, the anchors on the pad, all of that had to pass inspection. All that had to go through permitting, engineering. None of that was just because I said I thought it would work. Right? And then the last photo on the right there is only a small part of the crew. There's the ones that happen to be in that picture. I mean, there's quite a bit of people. But Ash, who's not here tonight, who's currently probably my primary assistant right now, has been with me for about 5 years. And Ronnie, who's been working with me for, you know, over 2 decades, has helped me with a lot of the installs around here. Me, Nash, my amazing daughter, who filmed the entire installation, has yet to edit it. And then Teresa. So then I think that's our, like, you know, album cover shot.
I was
We're trying to make, you know.
I was trying to be serious, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
Of course, I was grinning the whole time. They told me to look cool. I couldn't pull it off. They just took the picture after. So this is the piece in place. I took this photograph a couple weeks ago. It was fun. There was a soft opening at the park on December 23rd, I think. I went to the opening and I was walking up, so I hadn't really seen it. Like, we got it installed, but we were all like barely seeing it at that point. It was just about getting it there. And so I hadn't been back until that soft opening. And at the soft opening, I was walking into the park. There were people everywhere. It was kind of early in the morning, like 10 a.m. or something, for a lot of people to be showing up for this. It was great. But I was walking up in the pathway, and there was a little girl with her family in front. She was like this tall, and I don't know how her eyes were like way better than mine, but I was directly behind the family, and she's like, Daddy, look at that sculpture in the park.
Yeah.
I was like, it was like way up there, and I was like, oh, I can't even see it from here. Anyway, so it was exciting to like see people responding. Right now there is still orange, like plastic orange fencing around this because it is a mud pit, and the park is getting seeds laid down right now. But it's been great. The couple times that I've been there, it's been such a joy because I'm watching people, you know, interact with it at a distance because it's in a meadow and you can't really get up close to it. But people are getting as close as they can to it. This was the best thing for me. There was someone doing Tai Chi in front of it, like right dialed in, like right in front of it. And I was like, oh. And then I was there with my parents one day. We were sitting on one side of it, and there was 2 little boys, like 8-year-old boys, sitting on a picnic table going like this, like talking and pointing things out. And I was like, oh, this is so good. This makes me happy. It's kind of what I need to see. So Yeah, but the grand opening is going to be spring, we don't know when. The, website still says spring 2024, but that's coming up. Yeah.
So I guess that is just sort of, we
Yeah.
sort of talk about the design and the shape. So, you know, like I mentioned earlier, when we took that tour, I was really taken by these, yeah, he must have said basins at some point that word really stuck with me, the idea of things flowing through it. And that's where these sort of cupped forms emerged from. You know, I also just like these cupped forms. So I'm always looking for an excuse to kind of put them into something, but, and to kind of create this cantilever effect. Uh, uh, you know, I'll talk briefly about, you know, there's this hexagonal base. It's like, why a hexagon for the base, or why not a circle or a square? Well, because I've seen a lot of circles and squares, so why not? But and hexagons are neat geometry, right? I believe it's the only polygon where the radius is the same length as the side, so it's an easy geometry to draw. But my mentor Tom Yodi, who was actually the person who introduced me to the Lake Oswego program 15 years ago, when I was, you know, really just kind of getting started in sculpture. And he was like, Mike, you should apply. And I'm like, ah. And I was like, Mike, call Elaine Parker. She was the director at the time. It's very nice. Apply. And I did it. That was Sprout. And that, you know, so that was really, and so Tom used hexagons in his work all the time. And so this was my little, and I've been using them over the last year in a number of pieces. And this was my little ode to him. But you know, when you look at these shapes, I mean, all of this is designed to be interactive. And when you go see the sculpture on site, there's no accidents there. Everything has been considered. Every surface of the bronze, every surface of the weld. If I had thought it needed to be ground more or changed, it would have been. So you see marks from the tooling process. You don't maybe see so many of them in this photograph. You might see some on that upper part there, but you see where my tools pushed into the metal and created creases and notches. Let's see what the next photograph looks like. You can see a little bit of that ripple effect up at the top of that cup right there. So that's all been gone over. There's nothing sharp there, but you can still feel that plasticity, right? That ductility and that squish in the steel, which I think, you know, translates. You know, we see steel, we see it at the airport, we see it on the side of the Max train rails. We see structural steel all over this great city of ours, but we don't often see it manipulated in that way at that scale. And so my hope is that gives you, you know, just grabs your eye for long enough to look at the rest of it. I love the way this the hair in there is one of my favorite ones. And the beat on that hair is so fantastic. Any of you who've ever had the you know, good fortune to visit a Rodin sculpture garden or interact with Rodin's work at all, you know, when you see his work, which is figurative but also abstract at the same time, because the scale of his characters is so immense, and that was how he sort of got the emotional effect forward. And I remember as a young kid, I was lucky enough to get to Stanford University has actually one of the finest Rodin sculpture gardens in the country. And I remember hanging on, you know, I'm talking a little kid, you know, I remember hanging on to the thumbs of like the Burgess of Callus or some of these other sculptures, right? And this was this giant bronze thumb. And there was an immensity to that experience that I didn't recognize till many years later as being important, but I clearly remember it. And the beak of that bird has the same feeling to me, right? It's right there at handle grip size. So, you know, people are gonna go home, you know, that's gonna go home in people's memories, hanging off the beak of that heron while talking to a friend or whatnot. So,
Well, and then also then, you know, your big forms and then the precision of Teresa's pieces, you know, and how like those surfaces are so refined and cast, whereas you're using, you know, the force of moving the metal to make it what it is. Yeah. Yeah, I think that the peak of that heron is gonna be nice and bright here.
Yeah, I think so too. It will touch here. Yeah.
in the conservative notes, you know, we had to give them a maintenance plan for it, and you know, they're like, when should it be re-oiled or when should it be refinished? And I'm like, well, you know, as needed, right? It is coated with an oil, right? So there is an interface between graffiti and the surface on there, but that's going to wear off over time, and it's going to wear off where people handle it, and it's going to wear off where drips land repeatedly over time. And so I specified that those things should stay. You know, like you shouldn't be putting the patina back there. Let the natural wear and tear of people interacting with it and then, you know, environment interacting with it happen. You know, we'll see what they do with tagging. That's another story. I don't actually mind.
Yeah.
You know, like interacting, it's fine. You can't break it.
You know what, I just wanna do one quick shout out again to RAC, the Regional Arts and Culture Council. Salvador Mayoral, I believe, was the project
Yep.
manager for the Arrow Heights project in collaboration with the city of Portland. He's amazing, and he was an old colleague of mine and just taught me so much about the community engagement processes, which I know were in depth for this. I heard all about it.
Yeah.
So,
Sounds
yeah,
was great.
yeah, and I
Yes,
just
that was fantastic.
appreciate both of you so much. We're at the end of our slideshow. I don't know if Teresa, do you have any closing thoughts or things you want to add to the conversation right now?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Thank you.
I appreciate both of your warmth like so much, and I just echo what Nicole said, like the way that you're able to sort of capture Teresa's like fluidity and the shape shifting quality of the work in such solid like steel is just amazing. So I just think it's beautiful work. And grateful to be in proximity to it.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any immediate questions? Yes.
Some of your sculptures can be climbed on. You have a sign saying no climbing. Is that just because it's not ready yet? No. People will be able to climb on the sculpture.
I mean, they're not supposed to.
You're not
It's
supposed to.
against the rules. Yeah. Absolutely not. Do
Yes, it
not climb on the sculpture. I mean, you know, they're not gonna hurt the sculpture.
Yeah.
There's a bigger slide that you can't see in the picture in the other side of the park. And there's trees all around, so I mean, they
Amazing
won't
playground.
hurt the sculpture. And they don't climb the sculpture.
Don't do it.
No selfies on top of the sculpture.
Don't post it.
Yeah, so
Yeah. Does anyone else have questions? Martin?
Yeah, the question, excuse me, for both of you, in your quote, art education, are there sculptors in the past, living or dead, that have been inspirations to you or that you've learned from in one way or another?
Yeah, I'll go first. I'll take some sculptors that I love. I am not very art educated. I will have to say that I don't have an art degree and haven't done any art study, any art history. But sculptors who I absolutely love, Alan Hauser. I don't know if any of you have seen Alan Hauser's work down in New Mexico. Roxanne Swensel, also from New Mexico. Larry Avicana, he's an Inupiaq. You like Larry? I know, I was very excited. One of my pieces, I got to trade one of my bronze pieces for a Larry Avicana piece.
Oh my
That's big, but yeah. Yeah, I would say those are my three who I have loved consistently. Like I love to just, you know, look at the sculptures all the time online. Yeah, that's what I guess I'll say. Those are probably my favorites right now. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned Rodin, but I didn't really realize how much of an influence that was later on. But you know, when I really started digging into metalwork, you know, I was lucky enough that you know, as a young person, my creativity was encouraged. You know, paint and pencil turned into, you know, duct tape and cardboard. Turned into, you know, wire and pliers. Turned into, you know, at 16, a friend's dad showed me how to light an oxyacetylene torch and braze weld a bolt to another piece of metal. We needed something stronger than glue for this thing we were making. And that smell of lighting the torch and doing that work, and I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. So that's when I really started getting into it and looking at other metalwork and what kind of metalworker do I want to be. I wasn't thinking, oh, I want to be a sculptor necessarily. I just liked making things. But you know, I was fortunate growing up in the Bay Area to be exposed to a lot of interesting stuff. And I worked at and volunteered at a place called the Palo Alto Art Center for some time that actually hosted a lot of really high quality artwork. So I got to see things and more fabricated and what I call direct metal sculpture, you know, was starting to happen. I too have no art degrees to my name, but I did consider going to art school at one point. And when I visited that school, I kind of learned two things. One, I already had more or the same amount of equipment they had related to what I want to do. You know, jewelry departments are pretty well stocked. Maybe there's some foundry and casting, but you know, the welding and blacksmithing stuff is just sort of some stuff over in the corner. I already had all that. But at that college, I saw an exhibit of an artist named Albert Paley, who is no longer practicing. I believe he's still alive, but his career started in the early '60s, and was really an artist who took the industrialism of blacksmithing and metalworking and ran with it in the direction of making monumental sculptural steelworks. And I was real hot for his work for a long time. I actually visited his studio in Rochester, New York. I've seen quite a few of his site-specific works and really studied them. And I would say in many ways he pioneered working with plate in this way, using large hydraulic equipment, using large torches, working with a team, right? Not just being an individual in your studio practicing as a solo person. And many more, Richard Hunt, an abstract sculptor from the Chicago area, who creates these really interesting abstract hollow forms. I like his work a lot. Tom Joyce is another blacksmith sculptor from the New Mexico area who has really spoken a lot about the history of ironwork and imbued that into his work. He actually won the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship Award back in like 2005, and he used that $500,000 Genius Grant to buy himself time at Scott Forge, the largest industrial forge left in the U.S., to create work. So he used that stipend to buy access to an immense industrial facility and time working with their scraps, which were immense, and made some really interesting, squishy, chunky artwork. Eduardo Chilita is a Spanish artist whose work is really inspirational to me. So there's a lot, and it's fun now to those guys have sort of stopped, right? That was a generation ago, and it's exciting now to sort of be in the generation that is happening now. And I'm not the only one working with steel on a large scale, and I'm not the only one basically doing it in his backyard either, right? Like Albert Paley had a giant shop in a giant space. I built a shop in my backyard that has a large hydraulic press in it that I also built, and I know other artists around the country via Instagram. I don't know them personally, but I know their work, who are doing the same thing, building equipment and applying for opportunities and presenting amazing models and then fabricating that stuff themselves. And so a lot of fun.
Well, I would encourage everyone to just have brief, discussion and meet the artists. We'll probably be here for another maybe 10, 15 minutes. Thank you all so much for your attendance and engagement in tonight's talk. And I'll be seeing you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.